Hi folks, it's a bastard in here, and I'm sick and tired of this conversation about people complaining how this generation of consoles are being inferior to computers. No whoopee shit dude, of course they are. They have always been more inferior to gaming PCs. Just live with it. So even Review Tech USA, and actually this is my kind of my response to him again about the same subject about how gaming PC, how computers and consoles work. Okay, okay. Let's state the little facts in here. Consoles, they just simply have been inferior to computers from day one into this generation. There is nothing to complain about in there. Actually, PlayStation 4, for an example, it has quite amazing computing power, processing power behind it. And if the developers, they just are going to utilize all those cores it has and all that RAM it has, then it's quite powerful console. So you don't need to worry about it being too castrated for this generation, because it really is not. But I will give you a little gaming history in here, a little history about the consoles. Back in the days, when NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, the really good old 8-bit Nintendo was released, it had around 2 kilobytes of RAM power, okay? And 1.79 megahertz central processor unit, computing unit, well, CPU for short. So that's what its processor was, essentially. Okay, by that time, Amiga 500 was released. And what was the specs on Amiga 500? Well, for starters, it had 512 kilobytes of RAM. Yes. And it had 7.60 megahertz CPU. So, with a short mathematic thing, whatever. I'm really bad at mathematics, but anyways, if we do the math in here, Amiga 500, it was around, I will say, 10 times more powerful than regular Nintendo. Actually, if not even 20 times more powerful. Well, if we look at the megahertz, then it was around just 5 times more powerful. But still, it had more RAM, it had more power, and Amiga 500, it was kind of a 50-50 thing, but still, it was a computer. It was solely meant for, well, it was meant for gaming as well. There were lots of games for Amiga 500, but still, it was a PC. And then, and that was in year 87. They both were released in year 87. By that time, they also released a PC Engine, which was essentially about as powerful as Sega Genesis. And it had CD unit in it and more colors than ever, than NES could ever push out. Then, 3 years later, as NES was released in 1919 in Japan and 1991 in North America. Excuse me if I do recall these years incorrectly. And around 1992 all over the world. As NES, Super Nintendo, it had 128 kilobytes of RAM power, and it had 3.58 megahertz CPU. By that time, we had Intel computers, 486 Intel computers, and they were released in back in the same day. And those computers, they had 2 to 4 megabytes of brute RAM power. Again, you're welcome to correct me if I do recall this wrong. But anyways, I do believe it was from 1 megabyte to 4 megabyte of RAM power. And essentially, they had 60 megahertz CPU. So again, Intel computer 486 released in the same year, like yeah, 4 times more powerful. Again, then then in year 1994, PlayStation 1 was released. Well, guess what? 2 megabytes of RAM power. Woo! That's amazing. And 33 megahertz of CPU, the processing power. Well, it was only twice as powerful as Intel 486, and that was 4 years after. But hey, 4 years after, also the computers got better. And you know what? We got Pentium, which was released in 1993. And only 2 years later, those Pentiums, you had a option to buy a Voodoo graphics card, which alone was almost as powerful as PlayStation 1. It did boost like gaming experience into great atmospheres. It was like completely something else in standards of gaming. But anyways, back to year 1994. Well, a year later, Windows 95 was released, and by then people had upgraded their computers to have like 8 to 16 megabytes of RAM. And I, back then in 1995, had a computer, Olivet PC, which had a 160, which was running at 166 megahertz CPU. That is, let's see, in comparison, again, that is like, and I'm sorry, I'm really bad at mathematics, but that was like 4 to 8 times more powerful than that generation console, the PlayStation 1. And PlayStation 1, it was considered as a cutting edge back then. Yes, back then. I'm scratching my back. Again, computers being more powerful. And yeah, 2 years later, we had the Voodoo graphics card. And then, for like 6 years later, we got PlayStation 2, which was released in year 2000, in the millennium. Woo! We got our millennium back then. Does anyone remember the millennium virus, which was complete bullshit? People thought that computers are going to break because the clocks are. I, I, it was really stupid, really. It was a hoax. People were preparing for Inferno because computers couldn't, for some reason, couldn't like count the dates. But anyways, back to PlayStation 2. It was released in 2000, year 2000 in Japan, and year 2001 in North America. Again, if I do recall these dates and specs a little incorrectly, please be welcome to correct me. And in year 2002, it was released worldwide. PlayStation 2 specs. Sorry, I have to cheat a little. I have to read the specs from the chart. I did a little research in here. PlayStation 2, 32 megabytes of RAM power and 166 megahertz of CPU. That was essentially pretty much as powerful as my computer back then. Actually not. It was less powerful than my computer back then. Okay, I do realize there are other factors in there as well. Okay, actually, yeah. Anyways, if we jump back into year 1994, I forgot to mention a little thing about the PlayStation 1. Back in the day, it was possible. There were these monitor thingies, the good old glass monitor, which were like heavy as shit, and they hurt pretty much if you had epileptics, you couldn't watch it at all because it was just irritating experience. But still, back in the day, in 1995, when PlayStation 1, it had a resolution of 320x 240. That was a PlayStation 1 resolution, but back in the day, you could run games at resolution of 800x 600 resolution, so that was like way bigger experience. Ooh, fancy that. And actually, that reminds me, I remember installing SNES emulator into one of those old Intel 486 machines. I'm sorry if I am a little jumping back and forth in there. But anyways, I remember installing Super Nintendo emulator into those 486 machines. I think it had like around 4 megabytes of RAM power. And I'm not sure if it was what its CPU was, but it was really castrated. Perhaps it was running like 33 megahertz or something like that. And it ran. And it ran. The Super Nintendo, it ran on one of those things. Those really, really old castrated things which were like pathetic. Like pathetic in comparison to these days. Well, it didn't run perfectly, of course. There were frame rate issues and stuff like that. But hey, Nintendo emulator ran perfectly on them. Anyways, back into PlayStation 2. We had Riva TNT2. It was big graphics card back in the day. It was like amazing what that graphics card could do. It had like 32 megabytes of RAM, and I don't remember what its processing unit was, but I think it was 166 megahertz or less. But hey, the graphics card alone was almost as powerful as PlayStation 2. Again, but by then, Windows 98 was released, and the maximum amount of RAM you could pump into one computer was 512 megabytes. But back in the day, people had around 128 or 256 megabytes of RAM power in their computers, and they had like and their processing units, they were clocked around 300 megahertz, if not more or less. 300, 299, well, 199 megahertz. Again, in year 2000, PlayStation 2, 32 megabytes, 166 megahertz, and well, plus some other factors, of course, but still, computers were far superior. And then 1 year later, they released Xbox. Yes, the shit box. It was twice as powerful, essentially, as PlayStation 2 was. It had. Oh, hold on a second, I'm trying to remember if it was twice or 3 times more powerful. I do believe you're welcome to correct me if I do recall wrong, because I didn't take the Xbox's specs down, but still. Uh, yes, back in the days we had already had Pentium 4, and with the Pentium 4, mid-range Pentium 4 equipped with Riva TNT2, again, more powerful than Xbox, the original. And not only a year or two later, I do believe the Voodoo 3. I hate the word 3 because it sounds too similar to tree. They both sound that it's annoying to pronounce it. But we had Voodoo 3, which was quite powerful back in the days. It was essentially almost as powerful as Xbox itself. And that was in year 2001. back in previous generation, year 2005, when Shitbox 360 was released. I'm correct. Xbox 360. 2005, people, Windows XP was released. Yes, no, yeah, oh yeah, yeah. It was. Windows XP was already released, and you could pump 4 gigabytes of RAM into your PC. And by the same time, um, another graphics card was released, and that graphics card was 8800 GTS from Nvidia. Actually, that was released a year later, but just a year later. Anyways, Xbox 360, the peak performance is 150 gigaflops. Well, take a wild guess. What is the peak performance of 8800 GTS? It was 345 gigaflops. Again. And let's add up little numbers in here. In PC, you could have 4 gigabytes of RAM power. And your you might have had a dual core. People back then have still had one core PCs, so essentially a lot of people had like 3.2 gigabytes, either one or dual core PCs. But still, and when we do the comparison, I'm sorry if I'm stuttering in here, but anyways, if we do the comparison, 180 GDS. Wait, 8800 GTS. That's how you pronounce it. I'm sorry. Anyways, 8800 GTS, Nvidia, plus 4 gigabytes of RAM power, plus dual core, 3.2 gigabytes of processor power. Way more powerful than Xbox 360. Xbox 360, yes, it had 3 cores. Again, the 3. Why there are so many 3s in this world? Why everything has to be 3? I hate that. 360. It had 512 megabytes of RAM power. And also it had, 3 core, which were clocked to run at 3.2, again with the 3, 3.2 gigabytes in 3.2 gigs processing power, 3 cores. Well, you would think that 360 was like almost like PC back then, but no. Again, it was inferior in comparison. Much more inferior. It wasn't even up to the par. Do you see my little rundown in history in here? NES inferior to Amiga. SNES inferior to Intel 486. PlayStation 1 inferior to Pentium and Voodoo graphics card. PlayStation 2 inferior to Pentium 3. And a year later there was a Pentium 4 and almost as powerful as Riva TNT 2. Xbox, again inferior. 360, again inferior. So any goddamn retard out there who are coming and complaining about the specifications, the power of this generation, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, is a moron. I'm sorry, but consoles have always and will always be more inferior to computers. With few bucks, let's see, with 150 bucks, you can get a graphics card which is as powerful as PlayStation 4. It's a simple fact. So this concludes my little rundown in history. It was very nostalgic and just Anytime when someone is coming to complain that consoles are like low-end PCs, like that one retard, I think it was from Nvidia who said that like PlayStation 4 is a low-end PC, well, whoopie-doo shit. You don't say. It has always been that way. But don't worry. It doesn't end there. Just because they are low-end PCs in terms of computing power, it doesn't mean they are inferior in a way. I mean, let's take another rundown. A little gaming history in here, if you mind. Back in the days, there was for Nintendo. I will run down the same list. For Nintendo, the best that system could run down was Summer Carnival Rekka. That was a technical marvel for the system. Next thing, as NES, Star Fox. That was a technical marvel for the time. It could even run Doom as NES. Yes, amazing. PlayStation 1, Final Fantasy 9, the graphical marvel for the system. It could do so much. PlayStation 2, Valkyria Profile 2. It was amazing game. It was like spectacular. Go get it if you don't mind. I already have mine. Anyways, it was amazing, graphically beautiful game. On shitbox, Xbox, Halo 2. I fucking hate Halo from the bottom of my heart. But I cannot deny that Halo wouldn't have been a graphical marvel for this system. Again. And now on Xbox 360, again with the 3, Halo 4. It was a graphical marvel. And this generation it's not going to be any different. Live with it. These current generation systems, they have 8 cores, which are clocked at 1.6 gigabytes. And they have like 8 gigabytes of RAM power. So it doesn't end there. They can still, there is so much. Even though they are like computers, there is so much they can still do with those things. The most of the games in these days, they doesn't use more than 2 or 4 cores at the best. Actually, most of the games, they use only 2 cores. And perhaps some games which are like, which are better optimized for high-end gaming PCs, they use 4 cores. But still, seriously, there is so much they can do with that stuff. So it doesn't end there. Even though it might look like that this is the best the consoles can do in this generation, just look it out, they have maxed out the specs. Well, they haven't. It's a simple fact. I can already predict around 4 to 6 years from now, the games are going to look even more beautiful. Even Shitbox 1 is going to be able to run games at full HD 180p resolution, so don't worry about it. Go read the numbers. Be smart about it. Learn from the history. Anyways, that concludes my rant, so if anyone is coming to complain about seriously, is being like serious about this 720p and 180p thing and is complaining about it, well, he is a idiot. Just to put it simple, he is a idiot. The consoles, they can still do better, and the consoles, they always have been low-end PCs. Just live with it. So I'm the bastard, and I'm out.